because it helped our children battle against that idea that their little egos are so fragile that they can't ever be disappointed, that they can't ever lose, that they can't ever go through a difficult time. Honestly, it's the difficult times that mature us, don't they? It's the difficult times that help us be stronger. And sometimes it's the peers that are battling against the family. Sometimes it's their friends that are battling against them. And I think in our case, we learned that with my son. My son we kind of came home one day, and I went looked out the back window, and my shed was sitting up there. It had holes all over it. My son had taken a sledgehammer and had beat holes in the shed, or a baseball bat, and beat an axe. Took an axe and he beat holes. Whoa! Well, that was kind of his cry for help, I believe. And so we had talked to his teachers at school, and they'd said, unless you get your son away from this certain boy at his best friend at the time, he said he's going to go the wrong direction and he's going to make bad choices. And I had to become my son's greatest enemy, because I had to tell him, you cannot be best friends with this person anymore. You'll see him at school. I understand that. I can't stop that. But I can say you're never going to spend a night with him again. And you're never going to spend a lot of time with him again. Turns out his family was a church family, so it was additional response and difficulty because of that. But it was the best thing we could have done. And honestly, I believe it made the major difference in his life. He hated me. He hated me at first. But I did that along with spending time with him, going out and making him play basketball with me every evening. And pretty soon, after a few months, it did take a while, he said, Dad, you're my best friend. But I had to be his parent first before I could be his friend. Do you understand that? Have to be his parent first. I think it's important because, honestly, there's a lot of influences in our children's lives, and many of them are not good for them. And we as parents have to realize we're in a war for our children's lives, for our children's souls. We're in a war, and we have to do our best to be able to fight as good soldiers in the cause of our children, in the cause of them. One of the ways we can do our best is to live a life worthy of them following or them emulating. We want to live a life that's worthy of them being able to see what kind of life they should live. Children who are never very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them, James Baldwin says. Children have never been good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. Honestly, I can say all the right things, but if my actions don't back up what I say, which is my child going to do? Is my child going to do what I say, or are they going to follow what I do? Dads, be careful where you step, because there's a little boy stepping right behind you, right? There's somebody following you. Somebody emulating you. We need to be careful that we are setting the right lifestyle choices. Here, Rebecca and Isaac, they had chosen to honor one son above the other, and they made a mistake in that relationship. And so they were at war with each other over their sons. So the sons were at war with each other, following the example of their parents. I think we need to be really understand that we can really affect our lives, our children's lives, by the things we say and by the things we do. We should not expect them to be mature in themselves. We should expect them to follow our example. Should expect them ultimately to find a definition of what it means to be an adult, because they see adult things in us, right? You ever been in a situation with your kids. I have been with my wife and my kids. I don't know what we were arguing over, but I remember one of my kids saying, "Now wait a minute, somebody has to be adult in this situation." And so they took over the role. Obviously, our own immaturity was showing up, and they felt it necessary to step in. I think sometimes if we understand children, like this story illustrates, they will attempt to get their own way, divide and conquer. They will seek to get their way, even if it's bad for them, right? And if they can divide and conquer, and in this case, it's true that Isaac and Rebekah were ripe for their manipulation because they were at war with one another against which son they favored. Esau was favored by Isaac because he was a wild game hunter, and because he brought his dad home wild game, and his dad loved that wild game. Jacob was favored by Rebekah because he was one who dwelt in the tents, and he was the one that hung around. He's the one that did the things for her. And so each of them were favoring one or the other. I think we as parents have to be careful that we don't favor one child over another. Amen? My wife is very good at that. She's very good at making sure that everything is balanced. It hurts a little bit at Christmas time. But all in all, it's the right thing to do, to love each child the best that we can. Suzanne Wesley was asked which of her 12 children she loved the most, and she responded that she loved the one that had the need the most, the one that was sick until he was well, the one that was feeling bad until they felt better. And I think that's what we need to do as parents. We don't love one child over the other. We love them all the same. We have to make sure that we live a life that is equal as we think about them, a life that is pleasing to God. Titus 2:6-8 says, "Likewise urge the young men to be sensible in all things, show themselves to be example of good deeds, with purity in doctrine, dignified, sound in speech, which is beyond reproach, so that the opponent will be put to shame, having nothing bad to say about us." It is important how we live our lives because the children will follow us. So we should live to please God. We should get our standards from a trustworthy source, like the internet. Right? No, wrong. There was a time before the internet. Did anybody realize that? I mean, people have been parenting children even before there was an internet to find out how to do it. Matter of fact, some folks are fond of saying that when I got my child, I didn't get an owner's manual. You know why that is? Because you already had an owner's manual. Right? The creator of the universe, the father of us all, wrote a book. And in the book, he describes the best way to raise children, the best way. And he gives negative examples as well as positive examples. He gives examples of what to do when you find yourself failed as a parent. He gives examples of what to do when you find success as a parent, all in this book. We need to make sure that we get our standards from a trustworthy source. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord found in his book, found in a trustworthy source. I know society has a lot of advice on how to raise children, and I would say to you, where it agrees with God's words, follow it. Where it disagrees with God's words, don't follow it. Because this is the trustworthy source. This is the best manual for how to raise children. And the last thing in this part is we need to learn from our mistakes. We need to learn from our mistakes. Use them as teaching moments with your children. I think one of the things that we did with our children that I would want to do again is admit when we were wrong. And sometimes you really don't know who did it, even though you pretend like you know. You really don't have eyes in the back of your head, do you? If you do, that's pretty strange. You really don't know everything And sometimes in that effort to discipline our children properly, we may make a mistake. Have you ever accused the wrong kid of doing something? You ought to be in a position now where the only person you, like I am now, where the only person you accuse of doing something is your wife, and that just doesn't work out well. The children are all gone. I can't blame them for the lost tools. It just doesn't work out as well. But have you ever made a mistake in that? Well, we determined early on is that when we made a mistake like that we would apologize to our kids. And we would own up to it. And they didn't, you'd say, well, then they won't think of me as the perfect parent. They don't believe you're the perfect parent already. Don't worry about it. Okay? But when we make a mistake, if we own up to it, there's a bigger teaching lesson than just what they did or didn't do that we were accusing them of. There's a bigger teaching moment because they see the humility in our own lives when we admit that we did something wrong. They see the humility in our own hearts, and they understand how they can be humble. They see the admission of guilt and the ownership of that sin against them. They see that in us, and it's a great lesson for them to learn. They find out about grace, and they learn to forgive. All those things are important lessons for them to learn as they grow up. Amen? And it stems from us admitting that we made a mistake. Us admitting that we did wrong. And learning from those mistakes. So live a life that's worth emulating is important. Realize that there's a war against the family is important. The third thing I want you to see is spend time with your kids. Spend time with your kids. A story about a father who was disturbed about the length of time that his son took to get home. And one day he decided that he would go with his son on the way home from school to find out why it took him so long. And so he was making the trip with his son, and he settled on that 20 minutes was enough time for him to show up at home, and he was much later than that. So he says this, the 20 minutes I thought was reasonable was right, but I failed to consider some important things, such as a side trip to track down a trail of ants, or an educational stop to watch a man fix a flat tire, or the time it took to swing around a half dozen telephone poles, or how much time it took for a boy just to get acquainted with 2 stray dogs and a brown cat. In short, said the father, I had forgotten what it was really like to be 6 years old. You know, honestly, time for a child is a little different than time that we may consider. And we all talk about quality time. If we could just have some quality time with our kids. And you know, I think sometimes we have this illusion about what quality time is. Quality time is not enrolling our kid in every activity that is available to man. And then running as hard as you can to get them from this activity to that activity and watching them on the field. You know, I think it's really more important what happens before they go on the field and what happens after they go on the field than it really is what happens on the field, right? As far as the child's development, as far as the child's health, it's more important that we spend time with them, encouraging them, helping them to know they have somebody to talk to, somebody they can share their frustrations with. It's really important. I'm not saying it's that you shouldn't enroll your kids in sports. Just the opposite. I think you should help them to have an active life. But as you're involved in that active life, don't forget it's not just what happens on the field, but it's what happens in personal communication that matters. A coach is not going to be able to tell them every time, you did a good job. And the coach sometimes will say, watch that position. Where were you? Why did you leave that guy open? You know, right? Sometimes they need to not be instructed on how to do it better. Sometimes they just need somebody to say, I love you. I care about you. You did a great job. And I'm always there for you. Right?